good to be back for the weekly matchup show. The Sooners, after having last week off, back in action Saturday night, November 19th, as they'll take on the Baylor Bears. So it'll be a top 25 showdown, Sooners and Bears, 7 o'clock kick Saturday night on ABC. Sooners a big favorite to win the ball game. Now, before we get into the OU-Baylor matchup, if you've seen the latest BCS standings, you know that the Sooners are creeping back into the national championship picture slowly but surely, now ranked at number 5 in the country, according to the BCS. I have to admit, a few weeks ago, after the loss to Texas Tech, which we're still scratching our heads about to this day, I thought the Sooners' chances of getting into national championship contention with only a few games to go was impossible. But thanks to losses by Clemson and just recently Stanford as well as Boise State, the Sooners are now in the top 5. And while work still has to be done for OU, both with their control and out of their control, at least the Sooners are in the national championship discussion. So, can Oklahoma get there? They can, but certain things must happen. Obviously, number one, you got to win the rest of your games. Very obvious. Number two, I know Sooner fans are not going to want to do this, but you need to root like crazy for Oklahoma State to beat Iowa State Friday night. You need Oklahoma State to be ranked as high as possible, which right now they're at number 2 in the country. You need the Pokes to be number 2 and undefeated when you play them December the 3rd in Stillwater. That way, you can beat the Cowboys. It is a big, big time win on the road against the number 2 team in the country. And naturally, that's going to really boost your computer ranking, and it's going to sway some voters. And I don't know if it'll sway all of them. We'll talk about it in a second. And another key to, I think, Oklahoma possibly getting into the national championship game, January the 9th, it wouldn't hurt if Oregon got upset. I know that's probably not going to happen because they close out with USC, but that game is in Eugene, Oregon. And Oregon plays Oregon State. Oregon State's terrible. And then the Pac-12 championship game will be against the Pac-12 South champion, who currently doesn't have any teams in the top 25. So naturally, you think Oklahoma would pass Oregon in the computer rankings and maybe pass Alabama, who doesn't close out with anybody really tough. Georgia Southern and Auburn, neither team right now is worth a spit. So the Sooners are going to have an opportunity at the end of the year to make the biggest statement. So they should move up. Biggest question, and assuming, by the way, that LSU rents the table by winning their final few games, and of course the Arkansas game as well as the SEC championship game in Georgia are no gimmies at all. But let's just say LSU finishes the year at number 1. Can Oklahoma be at number 2? Two things are going to boil down to it. Number 1, how much the voters, we're talking about the human polls, take the Texas Tech game into an account still. There will be some voters who will not put OU at number 1 or number 2 in the country no matter what happens, because that Texas Tech loss is getting worse by the week because the Red Raiders haven't beaten anybody since that upset a few weeks ago. In fact, the Red Raiders have been blown out in every game since they beat OU. And then number 2 thing to remember is, do the voters want a rematch for the national championship game? Some don't. They don't want to see Alabama and LSU. They don't want to see Oregon and LSU. We've already seen them. LSU won both times. So that could help Oklahoma as well. So right now it is still iffy as far as if Oklahoma can play for the national championship, assuming that they can win their last 3 games, and if certain other variables happen. Now, naturally, if Bama and Oregon were to lose and OU were to win out, Sooners are playing for the national title. But right now, you can't depend upon that. And you can't just depend upon the humans to put Oklahoma in the national championship game just because they're going to have an opportunity to close out on the highest note. So those are things to keep in mind. Right now, I still think the odds are somewhat against the Sooners because I think the game at Stillwater, that alone is going to be a bear. but at least it's not impossible to think about national championship and think about Oklahoma in the same sentence. I think the bye week for Oklahoma came at the perfect time. Naturally, the Ryan Broyles injury is something that's going to affect you for the rest of the season. It is life without Ryan. But maybe that extra week allowed Oklahoma to develop the offense a little bit differently now that they know they can't rely on Ryan Broyles, especially on third down where he really excelled. Kenny Stills now becomes the man, and he has to stay healthy. He's had hamstring issues. Maybe this is an opportunity for the tight ends to get a little more involved, like James Hanna and Trent Rattery. And of course, you've got Roy Finch, who you can throw the ball to out of the backfield. And I think the defense, the OU defense, let's not forget them. They have to step it up a little bit more. You do that, you give your offense more opportunities to get the ball more often. Ryan Broyles' injury is a factor. Do not kid yourself and say it's not. But it doesn't mean that OU can't still be good on offense, and it doesn't mean that they can't win the Big 12 championship and possibly get more. The Sooners have to adapt, have to overcome, and have to get the job done without number 85. We'll see if guys like Reynolds, if Steele, as well as DeJuan Miller, we'll see if those guys, along with the tight ends and Finch, can pick up from where Ryan left off. It's going to be difficult, but I've learned to never underestimate Bob Stoops. And the Sooners are going to be playing against a Baylor team that's thanking their lucky stars after last week's almost major disaster in Lawrence, Kansas against the pathetic Jayhawks. At one point in that third quarter, Kansas was leading 24-3. But Baylor found the character, found a way in the second half to come from behind and win by 1 point. Now the Bears, back-to-back years, bowl eligible after being bowl ineligible for the first 14 years as a school in the Big 12. And a lot of those years they weren't even close to bowl contention. We all know Robert Griffin III, one of the best quarterbacks in the country, but don't rest on Baylor's running game. And of course the receivers led by Kendall Wright. Baylor has a lot of offensive weapons. Key number one of this game, naturally for Oklahoma, it's going to be the ground game. It's going to be Roy Finch. Baylor, for everything they do good on offense, is just the opposite on defense. They're horrific. 9th worst team in the country out of 120 teams when it comes to stopping the run. Finch should have a monster game. Just hold on to the ball. Expect Brendan Clay to get some action along with the true freshman Brandon Williams. And you've got also the fullback to rely on as well for the Sooners in Trey Millard. So the OU ground game has a chance to make a big statement, and that way the passing game, although you'll use it, you won't be as heavily dependent upon it. Key number two, it's going to be for OU to contain Baylor's ground game. I know Robert Griffin III, you're saying, how come I haven't mentioned him as a key? Well, he's obvious, okay? He's an obvious key. We're talking about keys that maybe we need to think about a little bit more. Terrence Ganaway. He's had a terrific year. He needs just about, I think, 110 yards to have a 1,000-yard season. I thought Baylor wouldn't be as good in the ground game because they lost their all-everything running back Jay Finley. Well, Ganaway's having a terrific year, almost 900 yards entering this particular contest. So if the Sooners can contain the run, make it a lot easier on the linebackers in the secondary, it's like that old saying, the run sets up the pass. Well, if OU can disrupt that run, it'll make it tougher for Baylor to move the football. Key number three, third down conversions. This was a big reason why Kansas almost pulled off the upset last week in Lawrence, because halfway toward the third quarter, Kansas had made 9 of their first 15 third downs, keeping the drive going as well as limiting Baylor with offensive opportunities. Third down conversions, major factor in this game. It was last week, and thanks to that, Baylor almost got beat. And I think at key number 4, limiting the Baylor big plays. They're going to score points. Baylor's offense is that good. But limiting the big plays is a big difference between winning this game by 3 or 4 touchdowns and having it come down to the fourth quarter. OU's going to get points, but they've got to limit the Baylor big plays. When I mean big plays, anything more than 25 yards, I think it's a big play. So limit the big plays, and that means taking care of the ball as well. Final thoughts on this game. The Oklahoma Sooners and the Baylor Bears, it's going to be a high-scoring game in Waco. But hopefully we'll see the Sooners do what they did last year in Waco, and that is get off to a terrific start and have the ball game be over before the fourth quarter even arrives. Sooners can't afford to look ahead. They learned that from Texas Tech. They're not good enough right now to look ahead, to look past anybody. So I do expect Baylor to score about 28 points, but I'll look for the Sooners to score anywhere from 6 to 7 touchdowns. I'm going to go 48-28. Oklahoma gets the victory and keep what was once their near impossible national championship hopes very much alive. I'll look for them to go 9-1 OU and win the game. I'll have my post-game show sometime on Sunday. Boomer Sooner.